Ash still hung low in the air where Lucan had fallen. It clung to the cobblestones and to the edge of Dorian's coat where his hands had been moments before. Light caught the particles as they settled, turning them briefly silver before they vanished into nothing. "Step away from the weapon," the night guard captain said again, voice sharp with command. The ring of guards tightened. Their boots shifted, halberds angled downward just enough to be threatening. The crowd pressed back, masks tilted forward in collective fascination. Fear and curiosity mixed easily here. Dorian stood up, his hands open at his sides, the dagger lying between his feet. His face was pale but composed, eyes fixed on the captain now rather than his blade. "He came to warn us," Dorian said evenly. "He was mid-confession when that knife hit his spine. We didn't do this." "That will be determined," the captain replied. "Fall in, all of you." Saberic's jaw tightened. Juno felt it through the tension in his stance before she saw it in his shoulders. "This is a mistake," Juno said, stepping half a pace forward, shield still lowered but unmistakably present. "You are about to restrain the wrong people. And you are about to escalate this into a real fight," the captain snapped back. "Hands where we can see them." Cassian's gaze flicked to the surrounding streets. Too many exits, too many eyes, too public to run, too brazen to fight. Someone deep in the crowd laughed again. It was distant, amused. Jackson swallowed. This is getting out of hand. Dion cracked his knuckles once, then deliberately unclenched his hands. "Dion, behave," he muttered. "But Dion does not like behaving." The captain lifted one hand. "Bind them." Two guards stepped towards the group, shackles in hand. "Stop!" The voice cut cleanly through the noise. Not shouted, not panicked. Certain. A woman stepped out of the crowd. The masks parted around her without anyone consciously choosing to move, bodies instinctively giving her space. She wore no festival colors, no ribbons, no feathers, and no mask. Her red leather coat caught the festival's light like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath. Dark hair framed her face, streaked faintly with gray, her expression calm and serious. Vera Morningstar. She looked at the dagger, then at the ash, then back at the night guard captain. "I saw it," she said. "All of it." The captain's brow furrowed. "This is an active investigation. Step back." Vera didn't move. "Someone in a velvet-hooded cloak," she continued, voice steady, "slipped through the crowd behind your man. Put that blade straight through his spine. Clean. Professional. He knew where to strike." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The captain hesitated despite himself. "You're claiming you witnessed the attack?" "I'm stating it," Vera corrected. "The killer vanished into the crowd before anyone here understood what they were seeing. These people were reacting, not acting." The captain's gaze hardened. "And who exactly are you to make such declarations?" "Vera Morningstar," she stated plainly. The captain stiffened. One of the guards behind him sucked in a quiet breath. Another shifted his grip, suddenly uncertain. Vera adjusted her posture slightly, polite, but unmistakably cold. "You'll find my reputation precedes itself with your lord, and he would trust my word without question." She gestured back towards the party. "And these people are invited guests of Lord Adrian, personally." The crowd leaned in. The captain's jaw twitched once before he spoke again. "That does not place them above the law." "Of course not," Vera agreed smoothly, "but it does place them above sloppy assumptions." She stepped closer now, boots crunching softly over Lucan's remaining ash. "They arrived here on invitation. They were expected, and you believe they chose to murder a night guard in the middle of a masquerade, in plain sight, surrounded by witnesses? That is your official position?" Several more murmurs rippled across the crowd. The captain glanced at the crowd, at the dagger, at Dorian still standing, still steady. "No," he said finally. "That would indeed not be likely." "Good," Vera replied. "Then we're aligned." She turned slightly, addressing the ring of guards now rather than their leader. "If further statements are required, these guests can be found at the House of the Silver Wolf. You know where it is." Juno felt the shift immediately. The guards did too. Their weapons eased, not lowered, but no longer poised. The captain exhaled through his nose. "This matter isn't finished." Vera met his gaze without blinking. Of course not, Captain. You have a murderer to catch. Another pause. Then the captain raised his hand again, not to restrain, but to order the men. Clear the area, he ordered. Find the cloaked suspect, quietly. Finally, the ring loosened. The crowd surged back into motion, whispers already mutating into rumor, speculation blooming faster than truth ever could. Vera turned to the party at last. Her eyes flicked briefly to Dorian's hands, to the place where the dagger had been. That was too close, she said quietly. Someone wanted this messy and public. Cassian nodded once. They almost got their wish. Vera's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Almost still counts. She glanced toward the street where Lucan had come from, then back at them. You should move, now, before someone decides to contradict my statement. Juno tightened her grip on the shield. You're sure we're clear? For the moment, Vera said. But there will be consequences for this act. She stepped back toward the crowd. I'll see you tomorrow night at the dinner. Try not to attract any more attention before then. Then she was gone. The group nervously gathered themselves and left the area. They didn't speak much on the walk back. The weight of losing Lucan and whatever information he held hung in the air. The Silver Wolf received them without ceremony. Cassian shut the door carefully once they were inside, sliding the heavy bolt home with a muted thud. The sound landed harder than it should have. For a moment, no one moved. Then, movement from the corner of the main room caught everyone by surprise, and Juno reached instinctively for her hammer. Benny emerged from the shadow with an excited half-growl, half-bark, and leapt onto Cassian, who caught him with ease. At the sight of the giant St. Bernard, the tension broke. Achoo! Leaf sneezed instantaneously. Good boy, Benny, protecting the house for us. How are you, boy? Cassian eased, ruffling the dog's fur. Benny's tail wagged excessively, acknowledging everyone as they entered. A small mechanical whiz and chirp followed as Dorian's companion flew down from a high bookshelf and replanted itself on his shoulder. Dorian smiled. Well, home sweet home, huh? The group settled in, taking seats and beginning their nightly routine, but still avoiding the events that had just occurred. Siberic remained near the door, listening, posture rigid until he was satisfied no one had followed them. Only then did he relax enough to remove his mask, setting it aside with deliberate care. Juno leaned her shield against the wall and turned to Leaf. Leaf, we need to talk, she said. Leaf had already started toward the stairs. He paused. Slowly, he turned back, the white porcelain mask still hanging loose from one hand like he hadn't quite decided whether to discard it or keep it close. About which part? He asked evenly. My journey into the void, or the drunk who mistook me for a ghost? Cassian stepped forward, voice low. Both. Leaf's jaw tightened. I told you what happened with the sphere. You deflected, Dorian corrected gently. There is a difference. They gathered in the main room, tension settling into the furniture with them. Jackson slumped into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Gabriel leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful rather than confrontational. Juno stayed standing. The encapsulated cosmos don't just show nothing, she said. Valentin said that himself, and the man at the festival didn't just guess. He knew the name. It's not exactly a common one. Leaf looked at the floor, then back up. You want me to tell you that I had a vision of doom? He said. Fine. It was unsettling. It wasn't useful, and it doesn't change what we're doing tomorrow. That's not an answer, Cassian replied. It's the only one you're getting tonight. Siberic watched him closely. Someone recognized the name you carry. That makes it relevant. Leaf's eyes flicked to him, sharp. Or it makes that man a drunk who couldn't let go of a dead friend. Juno stepped closer. He said Leaf Doomstride was pulled from a river with a knife in his back. The room went very still. Leaf didn't react right away, and when he did, it was subtle, a tightening around his eyes. I told you, he said quietly. He was mistaken. Dorian tilted his head. Then help us understand how. Leaf's gaze hardened. Every truth is not owed to a committee. Jackson winced. That was sharper than necessary. Because you're pushing, Leaf shot back. After a day where I nearly lost myself to a thing that wanted me to stay lost, and we almost got framed for murder. Gabriel straightened. Leaf. No, Leaf said, voice firm but not loud. I didn't betray anyone. I didn't make a deal. I didn't touch anything after Valentin pulled me away, and whatever that drunk thought he recognized, it doesn't change who I am standing here with you. He looked at each one of them in turn. Or why? Silence followed. Not hostile, unresolved. Juno searched his face, weighing something, then exhaled slowly. We're not trying to trap you. I know, Leaf said, but tonight isn't the night for excavation. Dion cleared his throat softly. Dion think everyone is tired and upset and possibly hungry. That is a fair assessment, Gabriel replied. Jackson pushed himself to his feet. I vote we stop emotionally flaying each other and get some sleep before the city invents a new reason to ruin us. Saberic grunted agreement. We do need clear heads. Juno hesitated, then stepped back, giving Leaf space. This conversation isn't over. I know, Leaf said. Just not tonight. One by one, they drifted toward their rooms. Boots were unlaced, weapons set within reach rather than stowed, doors closed softly, not out of secrecy, but caution. Leaf lingered last. He stood alone in the common room, mask resting on the table, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. For a moment, the image in the glass shifted. Not truly, not visibly, but his mind supplied the memory anyway. A throne. A smile. He turned away before it could settle. Sleep came unevenly, but eventually, for everyone. Morning arrived carefully, with a soft negotiation of light against shutters and the distant murmur of Braxia waking into routine. The mood was lighter. Not healed, not resolved, but steadier. Breakfast was simple and fast. Bread, fruit, something hot that Dorian had insisted on cooking. Jackson claimed it was charred with intention. Gabriel laughed at that, the sound surprising everyone, including himself. Cassian stood at the window while he ate, posture looser than the night before, though his eyes still tracked the street below out of habit. He tossed Benny scraps in between bites, who made no complaints. Juno rested her shield against the table and leaned back in her chair. We made it through the night without any surprise visits, she said. That's something. Low bar, Jackson replied, swallowing the last of his bread, but I'll take it. Dorian folded a piece of parchment and slipped it into his coat. Adrian's dinner is tonight, which means whatever leverage we're going to have, we finish collecting it before sunset. Juno nodded once. Valette Grimm opens early. Tailors who outfit vampire courts don't sleep like normal people. Dion brightened. Fancy clothes day! Saberic sighed. I hate fancy clothes. You hate joy, Jackson said mildly. They stood, already moving with purpose. The plan came together without argument. Gabriel would go to the Needle and Vein with Juno, Cassian, and Benny in tow. The rest would return to the collector's gallery. If Valentin's people found the shipment, Dorian said, fastening his coat, we need confirmation, and if he's willing to release the harp, we secure it before anyone else decides they want it. Jackson placed a hand over his heart. I promise to be very normal about this. No, you won't, Saberic replied. They split at the door with a few exchanged looks that said, tonight matters and don't get killed before dinner. The Needle and Vein was open when the trio arrived, its frosted windows glowing faintly from within. The sign hung exactly as it always had, understated and expensive without ever saying so aloud. Inside, Valette Grimm was already waiting. She stood beside a long garment rack draped in protective cloth, hands folded, posture immaculate. You're on time. I'm surprised, she said. Cassian glanced at the door behind them. We're early even, I think. Valette sniffed. You're early for guests, but late for fittings. Fortunately, I plan ahead. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she pulled the cloth aside. The suits and dress hung in precise order, every seam sharp, every line intentional. Dark fabrics that drank in light, subtle embroidery that revealed itself only when the lanterns caught it just right. Clothing designed not to outshine a vampire lord, but to blend in like they belonged. Juno stepped closer first. Her dress was structured without being restrictive. Valette watched her reaction carefully. You needed something that does not pretend you are harmless. Juno nodded once. You succeeded. Gabriel's suit was overstated deliberately. He let out a deep whistle as he took it in. This will attract attention, he said. Valette smiled thinly. That was the goal. Cassian grabbed his suit last as Juno piled the rest over her arm. Black, layered, cut sharply at the shoulders. He stared at it longer than the others. Valette noticed. It fits the man you are now, she said quietly, not the one they tried to make you. Cassian exhaled through his nose. Thank you. Then Valette reached behind the rack and produced something else. Something smaller, but elegantly tailored. Cassian stared. It was a miniature version of Cassian's suit, tailored precisely. Dark fabric stitched with the same subtle gold threading, cut to allow movement for a creature that was very clearly not built like a person. Cassian looked between her and the outfit. You made a matching one for Benny? A condolence gift, Valette replied crisply. For everything you've lost, and everything you're pretending doesn't hurt. Benny sniffed the air, then pawed at the hem of the garment experimentally. Cassian swallowed. He can come with us to the party? No, Valette said immediately. Lord Adrian does not allow animals in the castle. Pets, familiars, mascots, or even emotional support horrors. He is very specific. Benny's ears drooped. Cassian crouched, resting a hand on Benny's neck. It's okay, boy. At least you'll look dapper guarding the house. Benny chuffed, unconvinced. Valette handed Cassian the outfit. He deserves to look like he belongs with you, on an occasion like this. Cassian accepted it carefully, as if it were something fragile. Thank you, he said sincerely. Valette stepped back, already turning away. Don't be late to dinner, she added, and don't embarrass me. I do have a reputation. Gabriel smiled faintly. Thank you for your insight and excellent work. Valette waved her hand and disappeared into the back of the shop. The three of them left the Needle and Vein carrying the evening's wardrobe and headed back towards the Silver Wolf. The collector's gallery felt different on their second visit. Not safer, not friendlier, just awake in a more deliberate way. Sunlight filtered through the tall arched windows in narrow crimson-tinted bands, catching dust motes and turning them into slow-moving constellations that drifted between the cases. The gallery's artifacts seemed less theatrical this time, but no less dangerous. If anything, they looked more honest. Objects waiting patiently to outlast everyone in the room. The five of them were admitted without ceremony. The masked attendants were already at work, moving with the same unnerving efficiency as before. Small figures in dark red robes passed between cases carrying ledgers, sealed crates, and objects wrapped in sigil-marked cloth. Lord Valentin himself waited near the center of the gallery, spectacles perched low on his nose as he reviewed a ledger that was visibly thicker than the one he'd held the day before. He closed it as they approached. Efficient, he said pleasantly, and accurate. Two qualities I find increasingly rare. Jackson clasped his hands together. So you found the stuff? Valentin smiled. My people recovered what remained of Sylvanus' stock exactly where you claimed it would be, he said. Unmoved, untampered, poorly hidden, but that is not surprising in the least. Leaf noted the word remained and said nothing. Valentin continued, clearly enjoying himself now. Several buyers who had been waiting on delayed deliveries have already been reassured. My losses have been corrected, my reputation stabilized, and a few inconvenient questions have been redirected elsewhere. He gestured lightly toward the deeper vaults of the gallery. In short, you have done me a considerable service. Jackson grinned. We do aim to please. Valentin's gaze slid toward him, amused. And so, I am a man of my word. He turned and led them down the same aisle as before, past cases reinforced with iron latticework, and objects too pricey to even consider. The harp waited exactly where it had been. Its onyx frame drank in the daylight, edges sharp and smooth as obsidian glass. The ember strings pulsed faintly, brighter now, as if recognizing the direction Jackson was approaching from. Jackson stopped a respectful distance away. I want to be very clear, he said. I am attempting to look calm. Internally, I am freaking out. Valentin chuckled softly, as one should when standing near destiny. Please don't call it that, Jackson replied. It makes the transaction feel cursed. Valentin rested one gloved hand on the stand. The infernal harp is ancient, but not fickle. It responds to intention, to will shaped by emotion rather than ambition. That is why it called to you. Dorian studied it carefully. And you're willing to part with it? Yes, Valentin said. He turned to Jackson fully. The price reflects my gratitude, not its rarity. 800 gold. Jackson blinked. Once, then again. That is shockingly reasonable for a world-altering magical instrument, Dorian said, calculating in his head. Valentin turned to him. I prefer transactions that encourage long-term survival. Yours appears uncertain still. Leaf exhaled quietly through his nose. When can I have it? Jackson asked. Tomorrow morning, Valentin replied smoothly. Discreet, secured. I will not have it carried through the streets by someone who might decide to test it. Jackson placed a hand over his chest. I promise to only test it responsibly. No, Valentin said gently. You promised nothing of the sort. But I admire your optimism. Jackson nodded solemnly. Okay, fair. Valentin began finalizing the ledger entry while Jackson provided a small pouch and handed it over, while Dion patted him on the back with a generous smile. Leaf, on the opposite end of the room, found himself drifting, just slightly, toward the far edge of the gallery, toward the sphere. The encapsulated cosmos rested on its velvet cradle, galaxies turning slowly within, distant and patient. It did not glow brighter this time. It did not reach for him. It waited. Leaf stopped several paces away. His hands clenched at his sides. He remembered the throne, the smile, how natural it had felt. Behind him, Siberic's voice cut in quietly. Don't. Leaf didn't turn. I'm not. That thing doesn't care, Siberic continued. It will take whatever you give it. Leaf nodded. I know. For a long moment he simply stood there, eyes fixed on the swirling stars. Then he stepped back, deliberately. Valentin observed the exchange with polite interest. Restraint, he said. That is rarer than courage. Leaf met his gaze. It already took enough. Valentin smiled thinly. Indeed. He closed the ledger with finality. Your harp will be delivered at first light. I suggest that you are awake to receive it. Objects of that age dislike being left unattended. Jackson gave it one last, lingering look. Sleep tight. The harp's ember strings flickered once. The masked attendants opened the doors without being asked. As the five stepped back onto the street, daylight washing over them, Dorian adjusted his arm and exhaled. One more piece acquired, he said. And one less temptation, Siberic added, glancing at Leaf. Leaf shrugged lightly. I'm learning. They turned toward their temporary home and started walking. The silver wolf was louder than it had been in days, not with music or laughter, but with motion. The rustle of fabric, the clink of buckles, the soft thud of boots against old floorboards as everyone moved with purpose instead of exhaustion. The house felt temporarily reclaimed from dread, its walls holding something like momentum. Plans had been spoken, roles understood. Now came presentation. Dion emerged first to be dressed. He had, technically, complied. The suit was impeccably tailored through the chest and waist, dark charcoal with a subtle sheen that caught the light when he moved. The trousers fit perfectly. The shoes were polished to a mirror shine. The sleeves, however, were gone. Not altered, not shortened. Gone. They had been torn clean away, seams sacrificed without hesitation, leaving his massive arms bare beneath the structured vest. Jackson stared. You know sleeves were not a personal insult. They were restrictive, Dion replied calmly, adjusting his tie. And Dion must be ready to defend honor, or a beautiful lady. Behind a closed door, Juno blushed. Siberic walked past him without comment, finishing his tie. Gone was the armor, in its place layers of black, a long coat, fitted shirt, dark gloves, no ornamentation, no shine. The absence of metal made him look more dangerous, not less, like a blade left deliberately unsheathed. Everyone paused when Juno stepped into the room. Her dress was black lace layered over deep green silk, the color only visible when the fabric moved. It hugged her frame without restricting, practical even in elegance. The raven mask rested against the side of her head for now, its silver-etched wings catching the light in sharp lines. Hints of green threaded the seams, very subtle, intentional. She adjusted one glove and met Dion's eyes. He was staring, jaw on the floor. Hammer Queen makes Dion feel funny, he stammered. Cassian entered the room and let out a whistle. Ooh, you do look completely different in a dress. Juno wrinkled her face. Don't get used to it. I hate wearing stuff like this. Dorian joined them in the common area and looked at Cassian, then back at his own outfit. Twins, Cassian said with a smile. His suit mirrored Dorian's in cut and tone, dark, sharp, understated, but where Dorian's lines were precise and academic, Cassian's carried a harder edge. The tailoring emphasized control rather than comfort, the kind of clothing meant to sit correctly even when the wearer did not. Dorian straightened the cuffs beside him, calm and composed. "We look like we planned this," he observed. Cassian exhaled. "That worries me." Gabriel descended the stairs from the upper floor, and everyone turned to him. His suit was deep purple, almost black in shadow, rich enough to demand attention without shouting for it. Gold-threaded accents traced the lapels and cuffs, subtle but deliberate. The top hat completed the silhouette, tall and elegant, shadowing his eyes just enough to make him unreadable at a distance. Cassian squinted. Gabriel looks like he owns several souls. Gabriel adjusted the brim. "Only the ones that volunteered." Jackson burst out laughing as he and Leaf entered together. Both wore burgundy suits with long coats that brushed the floor when they moved. The fabric caught the light like spilled wine, rich and theatrical. Their top hats matched, though Jackson's was tilted at a slightly irresponsible angle while Leaf's sat perfectly straight. "Tell me we don't look incredible," Jackson said. "You look like a pair of charming criminals," Juno replied. Leaf smirked faintly. "Maybe we are." At the edge of the room, Benny sat very still. His suit was perfect. Tailored with care and affection, complete with a tiny vest and a bow tie that was just slightly crooked no matter how many times Cassian had fixed it. He looked up at them all with an expression of deep, personal betrayal. Cassian knelt. "Aw, you look great, buddy." Benny grumbled a low growl. "You know animals aren't allowed," Cassian added gently. Benny turned his head away. Jackson came and crouched beside him. "We'll bring you back dinner. I'm sure it will be something completely edible." Benny's ears perked at the sound of an offering. Juno rested a hand on Cassian's shoulder. "He'll forgive you." Cassian wasn't convinced. They gathered near the door as final adjustments were made. Gloves tightened, cuffs buttoned, masks lifted but not yet worn. The plan was simple. Get inside, listen more than they spoke, watch everything, and remember that every smile would cost them something. Juno lifted her raven mask and tied it into place, the green accents flashing once before settling into shadow. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's go meet a vampire lord." The door closed quietly behind them, and Benny slumped to the floor with a groan. The road to the castle climbed gently out of the city, stone giving way to manicured earth and iron-latticed lamps that burned with a steady crimson glow. Carriages rolled past them in measured procession, wheels whispering over the cobblestone, lacquered panels reflecting torchlight and sigils. Nobles arrived wrapped in velvet and jewels. Braxia's richest patrons leaned from carriage doors to laugh too loudly. Lesser lords watched the greater ones with careful eyes, measuring influence in the tilt of a chin or the escort at someone's side. The castle loomed above it all. Tall, severe, elegant in the way only something ancient and well-fed could be. Its gates stood open, black iron etched with curling motifs that suggested thorns, wings, or both depending on the angle of the light. At the base of the steps, the night guard waited. Not ceremonial, practical. They wore darker armor than usual, plaits matte and unmarred, sigils subdued. No halberds, no pageantry, only swords, batons, and the quiet confidence of people who expected trouble and were prepared to end it quickly. Guests were filtered into a single-file line, invitations inspected as the attendees were allowed onto the property one by one. The line of night guard observed with a politeness that never quite softened into warmth. "Good evening," one of the guards said evenly as the party approached. "Weapons will be collected, magic will be restricted. Your cooperation is appreciated." Dorian felt the subtle shift in the air the moment they crossed the threshold between city and castle grounds. Wards, old ones, layered like sediment, the kind that didn't announce themselves so much as wait patiently for someone to make a mistake. Dorian stepped forward first, calm as ever, showing his hand, the runes pulsing faintly. A robed man behind the guards nodded once. The night guard stepped in, producing a narrow band of dark metal etched with faint markings. It snapped closed around Dorian's wrist with a soft click, the magic within it humming once before settling into silence. "Nullification bracelet," the guard said. "Limits active casting within the castle. You'll get your magic back when you turn this in on your way out tonight." Dorian flexed his fingers, testing the familiar absence. "Understood." Gabriel followed, offering his wrist with an easy smile. That earned him a longer look. Still, the bracelet snapped into place, the green shimmer that usually lingered around him dimmed, retreating like a tide pulled back by an unseen moon. He tipped his hat politely. Lovely craftsmanship. The guard did not respond. The robed man nodded towards Soberic and Juno as well, and they were fitted respectively. Dion flexed his arms as he approached. Do these count as weapons? He said, smiling broadly. The guard rolled his eyes. Keep it moving, Muscles. Cassian waited until the last moment. He stepped forward, posture relaxed, expression neutral. One hand rested casually near his coat as he spoke. No magic, no weapons. The guard reached out anyway. Routine. Professional pat-down. His hand moved down to Cassian's ankles and found something tucked into his boot. The shift was instant. Two guards moved in, fast and hard, hands seizing Cassian's arms and twisting them back before he could react. Pain flared sharp and white as the concealed dagger was ripped free and tossed aside. You were warned, one of them hissed. Cassian snarled, more reflex than intention, and earned a baton across the ribs that drove the breath from his lungs. The guards forced him forward, pinning him against the stone rail for a heartbeat too long. Enough, a commanding voice snapped. The robed man spoke from behind. I'm sure that this was mistakenly brought with him. Surely he wouldn't be that stupid, right? Right, Cassian coughed. The guards released him roughly. Cassian staggered once, then caught himself, jaw clenching, eyes burning but silent. Juno was already there, steadying him with a hand at his elbow. You all right? Fine, he muttered, though his breath came shallow for a moment longer than he liked. The dagger vanished into a pile of confiscated weapons. Next time, the guard said coldly, you won't be escorted, you'll be removed. Cassian met his gaze without blinking. Noted. While attention lingered on the confrontation, Leaf had already drifted, away from the group, along the edge of a fence as it curled around the property. By the time the night guard's focus returned to the party as a whole, Leaf was gone. No ripple, no alarm, just a gap where someone had been. From inside the castle, music rose faintly, strings and low percussion echoing through vaulted stone. Candlelight spilled from tall windows, promising warmth, indulgence, and danger in equal measure. The guards stepped aside at last. Enjoy your evening, one of them said. The party moved forward together, masks lifted, composure restored. As they approached the castle's front entrance, the music reached them first. Low, organ-heavy, with a violin and slow beat of a drum in a way that seemed to coil rather than flow. Beneath it lay laughter, refined and carefully measured, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. Warmth followed, thick with spiced incense and expensive perfume, layered over something older and less polite. Metal, wine, blood remembered by stone. The marble beneath their feet gleamed like still water, polished to a mirror sheen. It fractured their reflections as they moved, elongating shadows and bending silhouettes. Ahead stretched the grand ballroom. Cathedral tall and impossibly wide, it rose into shadow where the ceiling disappeared entirely, broken only by the glow of 100 golden chandeliers hanging at different heights like captured constellations. Candlelight flickered against carved walls depicting saints long since forgotten, some with tear-streaked faces, others frozen mid-snarl, fangs bared in devotional relief. Time had softened none of them. The room was alive with motion. Masked figures drifted and turned through the space in slow, deliberate patterns, crimson silks brushing against black lace, bone-white porcelain faces slipping past horned visages and gilded smiles. Some masks were elegant and restrained, others grotesque, exaggerated into beasts, angels, or devils, whose expressions never changed no matter what their wearers whispered beneath them. Names passed quietly from mouth to ear, old debts resurfaced in half-sentences, alliances were tested with glances that lingered just a moment too long. The air felt crowded not just with bodies, but with tension, measured, curious, predatory. Humans and vampires mingled freely, indistinguishable at a glance. Only the subtleties betrayed them, the guests who did not breathe unless they remembered to, the ones who stood unnaturally still amid the motion, and the smiles that held a fraction longer than comfort allowed. Waitstaff moved through it all like a practiced tide, clad in deep burgundy velvet, their steps perfectly timed to the music. Bronze trays bore delicacies that glistened under candlelight, bloody fig tarts dusted with spice, crimson wine jellies trembling with each step, slivers of rare meat lacquered in ruby glaze. Every utensil was obsidian or blackened gold, no silver, not even as ornament. Juno felt it then, the weight. Not just the grandeur or the press of nobility, but the sense of unseen threads pulling at every exchange. This was not indulgence for indulgence's sake. Every smile was a move. Every sip of wine was a test. The ballroom was not a celebration so much as a proving ground. "This place feels explosive," Dorian murmured, eyes tracking the flow of mass with open fascination, "and judgmental." Dion leaned in, voice low. "Dion should have worn sleeves." Jackson chuckled. "Nah, you fit right in." Cassian's gaze never stopped moving. The staircase at the far end of the hall drew his attention again and again, its sweeping arc rising to a pair of sealed doors wrapped in heavy red velvet, guarded by stillness rather than steel. Whatever lay beyond them was not meant for tonight, or at least, not for everyone. "Eyes up," Siberic said quietly. "Every corner of this room has ears." Gabriel adjusted his cuffs, expression pleasant, but his shoulders remained tight beneath the silk. Without his magic, the castle felt louder, older. He felt vulnerable. Meanwhile, far from the music and candlelight across the castle grounds, Leaf pressed himself flat against cold stone, fingers finding purchase where ivy once clung to the outer wall. The climb had been inelegant, slow, and entirely unnoticed. Braxia's castle had been built to repel armies, not a single man who knew how to disappear between breaths. He slipped through a narrow service window and latched it shut behind him. He found himself inside a pantry that smelled of spice, oil, and old wood. Shelves rose on either side, stacked with jars and sealed casks. A single lantern burned low on a hook, its light barely reaching the corners where shadows pooled. Leaf exhaled once, steadying himself, and listened. Above him, faint through layers of stone, music thrummed. Somewhere deeper in the castle, footsteps passed, measured, unhurried. He rolled his shoulders and began doing what he did best, planning his route, counting seconds between patrols, and mapping space he had not yet seen. The party had stepped onto the board. He had slipped beneath it. Back in the ballroom, the music swelled subtly as more guests arrived, the doors closing behind them with a final resonant thud. The sound carried weight, sealing the night inside. Juno felt it settle across her shoulders like an unseen mantle. This was not merely a dinner. This was a gathering of teeth and titles, of secrets sharpened into currency. As they mingled into the room, the chandeliers dimmed. Not enough to darken the room, just enough to be felt. Conversations softened in uneven ripples, laughter tapering into murmurs as if the castle itself had drawn a slow, deliberate breath. The candlelight steadied. The music came to a slow, purposeful end. Eyes turned, almost instinctively, toward the grand staircase. A figure stood at its summit where moments ago there had only been a shadow. Lord Adrian's emissary cut a striking silhouette against the velvet-draped doors behind him. His charcoal coat tailored to severe perfection, deep crimson silk threaded through its seams like a suggestion rather than a statement. A half mask of polished obsidian hid the upper half of his face, leaving only his mouth visible, curved in a practiced, uneven smile that revealed nothing. He lifted a bronze goblet. The hush completed itself. "Esteemed guests," he began, his voice smooth and precise, carrying effortlessly through the marble hall. "Noble houses, honored emissaries, and refined minds of Braxia, welcome." A few heads dipped, a few goblets rose in silent acknowledgement. "Tonight," he continued, pacing a single step forward, "we gather not for politics, not for pacts, but for something far rarer. Excellence." His smile broadened. "In a world teetering on a blade's edge, blackened by zealotry and fractured by certainty, Braxia remains steady." His gaze swept the room, unhurried. "Civilized, neutral, respected." Cassian felt the word neutral land with particular weight. "While cities burn in doctrine," the emissary went on, "and borders fray beneath shadow, Braxia endures. Not through superstition or sermons, but through intellect, diplomacy, and elegance." A few appreciative murmurs followed that line. Someone laughed softly, the sound brittle with approval. "In 1 hour," the emissary said, lifting his goblet slightly higher, "Lord Adrian himself will join you to raise a toast befitting of those who have kept this city proud, principled, and prosperous." The room seemed to lean forward as one. "Until then," he concluded, lowering the goblet just enough to signal permission rather than command, "drink deeply, speak freely, and remember, There is no greater armor than relevance, and no finer sword than subtlety. He tilted his head. The chandeliers brightened once more. Sound rushed back in like a tide reclaiming shore. Music swelled. Laughter resurfaced. Conversations resumed with renewed energy, sharper now for having been briefly restrained. Servants flowed immediately into motion, trays lifted higher, steps quicker, offerings more generous. Jackson exhaled through his nose. That man could convince a funeral it's a networking opportunity. Gabriel's eyes lingered on the staircase. An hour, he murmured. Plenty of time for mistakes. And plenty of time for people to decide who they want to be standing next to when Adrian walks in, Dorian added quietly. Juno shifted her stance, uncomfortable in her dress. We don't wander. We listen. Speaking of listening, where's Leaf? An entire floor below the party, Leaf ghosted through a servant's corridor with the patience of someone who understood castles better than their owners. The walls here were older, the stone unpolished and scarred with centuries of labor. The air smelled faintly of wax and iron. Somewhere above him, laughter filtered through passageways like muffled thunder. He paused at an intersection of hallways, listening. Footsteps approached from the left, 2 sets, unhurried, guards by the cadence. Lee flattened himself into an alcove just as they passed, conversation drifting by without pause. I don't like the way we have this event set up. Adrian's orders, extra eyes, extra locks. Their voices faded. Leaf moved again, slipping through a narrow door into what had once been a linen room and was now a staging space for tonight's excess. Crates of glassware, racks of velvet-draped serving carts, a door marked with a discreet sigil he didn't recognize but doted anyway. He smiled faintly to himself. The castle was awake, alert, but it was also busy. Busy castles made mistakes. He slipped back into the hall and continued upwards toward the gala. 30 minutes had passed since the emissary had started the evening with his speech, and the guests were still enjoying the festivities loudly. A shift in energy washed over the room in an instant. A tightening of the air and a subtle reorientation of bodies and attention. Cassian felt it in his chest before he saw it. From the front entrance of the ballroom, the crowd parted, not with fear, but with reverence. Masks turned. Conversations died mid-breath. The organ's melody faltered, then reshaped itself into something slower, heavier, almost devotional. Gold and crimson moved through the sea of velvet and lace. Archbishop Corvinus Vale entered the ballroom flanked by his justiciars, their armor catching the candlelight like fresh spilled blood. They did not push the crowd aside. They didn't need to. People moved instinctively. Cassian's heart stopped. The heat came immediately. Not the slow burn from earlier. This was violent, instantaneous, a surge that drowned out sound and narrowed the world to a single advancing figure. His pulse roared. His hands curled, empty but aching for weight, for steel. Corvinus mounted a low stoop near the center of the hall, his presence pulling the room into a gravitational well. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Good evening, Braxia's most esteemed residents. I have come with a message from the Church of the Crimson Sun. One of great importance. So lend me your attention, only for a moment. He paused, letting the eyes of the room settle on him fully. You walk as free men and women, he said calmly. But tell me, does your freedom give you clarity or comfort? His eyes drifted across the masks, lingering, measuring. They rested just a moment longer on Cassian. Cassian's breath hitched. Do you feel freedom as purpose, Corvinus continued, or as indulgence? The silence was total now. There are winds moving in Kjlovania, Corvinus said, voice even. Not politics, not borders, winds of destiny. Winds that rattle the bones of those who once believed they had time. Cassian's vision darkened at the edges. A reckoning stirs beneath the crimson moon this season. The faithful feel it in their bones, and the church does not ignore such signs. Juno shifted closer, hand brushing Cassian's sleeve. Too late. The world fractures, Corvinus went on. Kings cower, mages chase shadows, but the light of the crimson sun endures. The heat in Cassian's veins turned into fire. And when the dawn comes, Corvinus said softly, when blood is weighed and names are called, Will you stand in light or in doubt? Something broke. Cassian moved. Not fast, not recklessly, purposefully. Juno felt it a half a second before it happened. Cassian! He tore free. The crowd barely had time to register the sudden violence of motion before Cassian was shoving bodies aside, masks scattering, goblets spilling crimson wine across marble. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. Saberic lunged, but he missed. Dorian tried to fire his gauntlet, but the band around his wrist flared, suppressing his casting. It was too late. Cassian charged straight to the center of the room, eyes locked on Corvinus with an expression stripped of reason and restraint. You sent me to die! The Justiciars moved. Not hurried, not dramatic. One stepped into Cassian's path and drove a gauntleted fist into his ribs with surgical precision. The impact cracked through the hall like a breaking beam. Cassian staggered, but tried to keep moving. The second wall of metal met him with an upward strike to the jaw. The world went white. Cassian hit the marble hard, consciousness shattering on impact. He did not rise. The room exploded into chaos. Shouts, panic, guards surging forward, guests backing away in rippling waves. The Justiciars hauled Cassian up like dead weight, iron hands locking into his arms as if he weighed nothing at all. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth, dark against the pale stone. Juno surged forward. No! Saberic caught her, hard. Not now. Dorian stood frozen, hands trembling. Gabriel's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Corvinus descended the pedestal. He stopped in front of Cassian and looked down at him with a scowl. Recognition flickered across the Archbishop's face. His face twisted into a wicked smile. Ah, Corvinus said quietly. So you lived.